This tutorial is not so much about the animation as it is about the code. And I'm still going to need to do a simple animation. I normally would consider using these quick little shortcuts, but they don't necessarily give me what I want. So it's easier for me just to go ahead and go to the new drop-down menu or do a Command N and call up this dialog window. So because I'm working on a relatively small screen, I'm going to make my animation here on a 300 by 250 banner, and I've got the ad selected, and that's the one I'm going to use. So 300 by 250 pixels, 30 frames per second, and it is an HTML5 canvas. This is important. So we'll go ahead and hit create. Now the first thing I want to do is configure my layout to something that I find a little easier to work with as a designer. So I'm going to the design view, and now I'm going to go ahead and fine tune my menu a little bit further. First thing I like to do is get away from the cloud libraries and just go to my local library here with the file that I'm working on. Next thing I want to do is show you what happens when I do a preview of the animation. So I'm going to go ahead and create an oval, and I'll change the color here to a blue, and I'll just click and drag right across over here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a command return. And that gives me a preview of the animation that I'm in the process of creating. So now that I've done that, if I move this out of the way, you can see that my timeline has been hidden by this output window. And the output window is giving me useful information, but I've read this enough times I really don't need to see it. And what I find just a little bit annoying is that it's constantly covering up my timeline. So even if I close this and come back over here, as soon as I do another command return, or if I use this option in here, it generates the animation, but it's always going to hide that with the output window. So just to save a little time in relationship to always closing it and opening it when I need it, I'm going to park this down here on the bottom of the properties option. So I'll go ahead and do a command 2 and a command 1. That gets me to the size that I need. The other thing that I have to work with is this actions window. And in this window is where all the JavaScripting is going to go. If I do a command return again to see my animation, you'll notice that the actions window disappeared. And it won't come back until I go back to the application. That I find a little annoying as well, because sometimes I like to be able to see what's going on with my code while the animation is running. So what I do is I go ahead and park this right in here. And now when I do a command return, you'll see that the code is now revealed underneath. So that's really convenient. So I'll go ahead and hide this by double clicking on the word actions. So that shuts down the tab. And I'm right back where I was before. Okay, so I created a simple shape, and that's this over here. And what I want to do is I want to select the whole thing. Make sure that when you select the shape that you've created, you select the whole thing. And I'm going to modify this. So I'm going to go to my shape settings, and on the stroke, I'm going to slide that a little bit wider just so it shows up a little bit better. It's somewhat exaggerated, but for our purposes, we don't really need it to look pretty. We just need it to be there so we can see how the coding is set up. So this is going to be an interface button, and if I do a command return again, you'll see that when I roll over this shape, nothing happens. And I want the little Mickey Mouse glove to show up. So in order for that to happen, while the whole thing is selected, I'm going to select Convert to Symbol or select F8. And that calls up this dialog window, and if I click on this pop-up menu here, the one I want is button. And I'll go ahead and hit OK. Now I'll do a command return, and we'll see this, and now you'll see whenever I roll over this, the little Mickey Mouse glove shows up. It's important to notice that the Mickey Mouse glove here is, as soon as I make crossover into the shape, that's when it shows up. Okay, now I want to be able to use the same artwork twice without having to create two buttons. So let me zoom this back out here. And so to do that, I can hold the Option key down, and I'm going to drag a copy of it over here. Now I want you to notice that I've got a library object in here. And that's this symbol here. This is a symbol number 1, and this is the artwork. And this works very similar to how Adobe Illustrator works with symbols, if not exactly. I actually have just the one button, but I'm bringing it from the library and I'm using it multiple times. So if I double click on the library and I make a change to the button, let's say I change the foreground color to a slightly darker blue, and now I'm going to go back to the main work area, which is called the stage. It changes the dark blue everywhere. So any changes I make to the symbol in the library are going to make the changes over here on the stage. Now, the way you can get into the symbol is by double clicking on it in the library, or you can double click on the symbol as it exists on the stage. This is still the one symbol, it's just giving me two different previews. So again, if I change the color over here to something else, you'll notice, I got to select it first. You'll notice that the color changes on the stage as well. Now here I've got a couple of options where I can change the rollover effect. So while it's static, nothing's happening in the up state, it's going to be this first color. And over here I want to insert the artwork again in the over. So I'm going to insert a keyframe. You can either do a right click with your mouse and slide down to insert a keyframe. That's one option. And the other option is to do an F6. So let me do an undo. And so again, the frame is gone. And on my keyboard, I'm just going to go ahead and select F6. And then that adds the color to it. So now I'm actually looking at the object in the second frame. And over here, I can change the color to something else for the over. And then on the down over here, I'm going to change the color over here as well. And so again, I'll slide down over here and call an insert keyframe. And on the down, on the center color, I'm going to go ahead and change this to yellow. So now if I do a command return, and notice that I'm still inside the button symbol. If I do a command return, we'll get a preview on the stage. The rollover turns it green, and the down will turn it yellow. And since it's the same one, I only had to make the modification on the one symbol, and it applied to both instances of the button. Okay, let's go back to the main stage, go to scene number 1. And I just used this word called instance. And this is one instance of symbol number 1, and this is another instance of symbol number 1. And over here, you're going to notice that I've got this same instance name. So I'll go ahead and call it my button. And I'm going to call it my button number 1. And I'll steal that name. And now I'm going to click on the other button, and I'll call this my button number 2. Okay, so now I need to create the shape that I plan on animating. So I'll just keep this simple. I'll select a rectangle, and I'm going to put it more or less in the center over here. So I do want to center it to my stage, so I'll select the whole thing. And here, while I've got my alignment tab open, or my alignment properties, I'm going to go ahead and center this to the stage. And then that centers that box up and down. I could center it this way as well, but I want it to be a little bit higher than not. Okay, so now I'm going to animate this. And in order for me to be able to make an animation, any object or shape or text box that gets animated has to exist in its own layer. So these layers work a lot like the Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop layers work. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this out of the layer. And I've got a couple of choices. I can either manually create a new layer, copy this layer and paste it into the new layer. The easiest way to get this into its new layer is to distribute it. So if I go to the Modify drop-down menu and I slide down to the timeline, there's an option over here for Distribute Layers. And the shortcut key is Shift-Command-D. You're going to want to remember that because we end up using this a lot. So I'll just go ahead and use Command-Shift-D for Distribute. And that puts it into its own layer. I'll move the timeline a little bit lower so we can see it. And here it is on layer number 2. And if I hide it in here by clicking on this little eye in here, you can see that that's the layer that it's on, layer number 2. And over here, layer number 1 is where I have the buttons located. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and animate it. So I want essentially 2 animations. I want to click on this and then have the box move over to the right. And I want to click on this and then have this move over to the left. So the first one I'm going to work on is the animation to the right. So I'll select the artwork. Then I'm going to go to the Insert drop-down menu. And I'm going to create a motion tween. But specifically, it's going to be a classic tween. This is the easiest one to control out of the bunch. And if you're not doing anything terribly fancy, this might always be the easiest choice to work with. So I'll go ahead and select that. And 2 things are going to happen. One, it's going to convert this thing into a symbol. It's asking me about it right now. So it says the selected frame cannot be tweened. You must convert the frame to a symbol in order to tween. Do you want to do it? Yes, I do. I'll go ahead and hit OK. And now it converted it into a symbol. And now, like the button that I have over here, it's now a symbol inside the library. And you can tell by the icon that this is something different. And it's got the shapes of the Trinity shapes, the triangle, the square, and the circle, to identify that it's some type of a graphic element. Above here is the button, and that's obviously an icon of a little hand over a button. So now you'll notice that my buttons disappeared, and the reason they did is because the playhead automatically went to the very end of the timeline. And it defaulted to 30 frames because that's how many frames per second I have. But if I scrub or take the playhead back to the beginning, the buttons show up. And so over here, what I want to do is I want to extend the timeline. So the easiest thing to do is to do a right click and insert a frame. So I don't want to insert a keyframe. I just want to insert a regular frame. And what that does is it extends the buttons all the way to the end of the animation. I will not be animating these. That's why I don't need a keyframe. This guy, however, will be animated. So this guy over here is going to get a keyframe. So I'll go ahead and do an insert keyframe. And what that does is it records the position of the end point and the start point. So over here at the beginning, this keyframe happens to be in the same X, Y, and Z location as this one. And now when I move this out of the way, I've just modified my animation. So if I go back to the first keyframe and I hit return on my keyboard, you'll see this animate over to the side. If I do a command return, you'll start to see what it's going to look like in the browser window. Okay, so I'm going to close that. Now just so that we can see this a little bit easier on the browser window, this isn't necessary, but I'm just going to go ahead and change the background color of the stage. So as long as you click on something, the properties will modify itself to that. And right now I'm clicking on the back, on the art, not on specific symbols or shapes, either on the artboard or on the background over here. And you'll see that the properties is now displaying document information. Over here is where I can change the stage background. So I'll go ahead and change that. I'll just make it a slightly lighter gray. And now we'll see what that looks like. Command return. So you see the animation moving. Okay, so that's the first. When I click on this button, I want this animation to take place. Now the second animation is going to be very similar, except this animation is going to move the other way. So I'm going to go ahead and take this first keyframe, and I'm going to hold the Option key down and drag this all the way to the end, past that first animation to frame 31. Now in here, I'm going to go to frame 61, and I'm going to do an F6. And the F6 is the shortcut key to insert a keyframe. Or you can do a right click and insert the keyframe that way. Since I'm working on an animation, I want a keyframe. And so that puts that at the end. So right now, frame 31 frame and frame 61 frame are in the same location. So the animation on this side, this is supposed to go over here to this side. So here I am at frame 61. I can grab this and drag this over to the other side. And now I want to see my buttons. The buttons disappeared, and I want to see them over here. So in order to extend this timeline, I'm going to do an F5. An F6 will look like it works, but sometimes the F6 causes more problems since technically you'll have two different button copies in each individual frame. So the less keyframes when you're not animating, the better. This is a mistake here, so that you don't want that. Now if you happen to put a keyframe in there by mistake, well, let me do an undo. And here's the right way to do it. Click over here and do an F5. And that'll take care of it. Now here I'm going to go ahead and make the mistake again. So here's an F6. And so if you happen to make an F6, the other option in here is to do a Shift F6. So F6 adds a keyframe, Shift F6 unkeyframes it. So it's back to the normal frame that I need. So here is all the animation that I need. As this starts, it's going to move over to the right, and then that's where it's going to stop. And as I do the animation from this side, it's going to move over to the left. Now I'm ready to start my programming. But before we do that, let's take a look and see what we have. So it's going to go non-stop, constantly changing sides, and the buttons aren't programmed to do anything. We want them to play. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a stop. Now, there's an option in the Windows drop-down menu to add code snippets. So under the Windows drop-down menu, there's this code snippets option. And what that does is it allows me to cheat a little bit in relationship to what code I use. You want to use HTML5 canvas. Don't use ActionScript. HTML5 is for JavaScripting. ActionScript is essentially a programming language unto itself. They're very, very similar, but not similar enough that you're not going to run into problems if you get them mixed up. So the first thing I want to do in the timeline is I want to introduce a stop. So if I open this menu in here, you'll see that that's the first choice. Now this is relatively easy to use, but it's even easier just to manually type it in yourself. But I'll just go ahead and use it anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on this, and you're going to notice that on the timeline I'm going to get a new layer, and it's going to be called Actions. So there's my Actions window. And it also included the command to stop the animation. This gray text in here is a comment, and it's just telling me how to use this stop and how it's supposed to work. Well, I don't need any of that comment on top, so right on the right side, or rather on the left side of the word this, I'm going to click up and drag, and now I'll delete and get that to go away. Now when I do a command return, you'll notice that nothing happens in the animation. So now I need to program this so it will activate this to play. Okay, now here's what's going to happen, and let me hide this. When I click on this button, the playhead is going to be advanced, and it's going to go right up to this frame in here. At this frame, I want it to stop. I don't want it to start looping again and go to the other side. I just want it to stop. If I'm on this frame over here, on frame number 1, and I click on this button on the left, then it's going to quickly jump over to frame 31, and then it's going to advance, and it's going to look like it's making it play to the left. So I'm also going to want a stop over here. So in here, I'm going to come back to the stop, and I'm going to hold the Option key down, and I'm going to drag a stop right over the middle keyframe on frame 30. And now I want to put a stop at the end over here. And I'll grab this, and I'll drag that to the very end. So Now I've got stops where I need them, but I need to get the play to go. So I'm going to click on this over here, and I'm going to go to the window drop-down menu, and I'm going to slide down back to my code snippets. Now what I want is an event handler that's going to make the playhead play. And here are my event handlers. So I'm going to open that up, and the one that I want is a mouse click event. So I'll go ahead and double click on this. While this is selected, I'm going to go ahead and double click on it. Now I've already named the button. This is button number 2, and this one over here is button number 1. So I'll program button number 2 first, since it'll be the easiest one to set up. So I'll go ahead and double click on here, and it's going to generate my code, and it includes that gray text that tells me what's going on. And so I don't need any of this. And essentially what this is telling me is that wherever you put the code in, this starts in here, and in this line in here is where you would put in your code. Let's go ahead and test it out right now to see what we have. So every time I click on this, I'm going to get an alert, and it's going to tell me that I clicked on the mouse. I'll close that again, click on that, and it's just telling me that I clicked on the mouse. Okay, so this is what you change. Again, I don't need all this gray text, so I'll just go ahead and delete it. This in here is an event listener, and what it's doing is it's listening for a mouse event, a click specifically, on this button, button number 2. And then once the click happens, it's going to run this function over here, which exists down here, and the function then is going to be whatever it says in here, which is currently the alert that says the mouse has been clicked. So in order for this to get it to play, I'm going to need the word this, followed by a period, and then I'm going to type in the word play. Now there's some helpers in here that in the event that you don't remember what the actual code is, you get a little bit of cheats. And you can double click on this and it'll go ahead and fill in the text for you. But it doesn't include the parentheses, so you have to remember to put them in. So I'll go ahead and do the open and close parentheses. And the line of the command is always ended with a semicolon. Not this one, because this is part of the larger function. But within this line in here, that should end with a semicolon. So I'm ready to go now. So if I go ahead and do a command return, and I click on this, you'll see that this goes out of the way, and now it's stopped. And now what I need is I need to get this one to work as well. So I'll go ahead and close this, and now I'm ready to start programming the other one. So I'll go ahead and close this temporarily for now. I'll select this over here, and I'm going to just do it the same way I did before. I'm going to select the event handler, and now I'm done with my actions. And in here, again, I don't need all this gray stuff. It added extra stuff. And the reason why I have more than one code is because I'm going to have it do two different things. Notice that this has no number at the end of the function name, but this one does. And it's the same number over here. You can't have a function with the same name. So this has to have its own unique name, and this one has to have its own unique name. Okay, so there's the alert code again. We'll get rid of that. And again, we're going to start off by typing in the word this, but now it's going to be slightly different. What we want it to do is to go to and play, so a specific frame number. So we start off with go to, and there's the little cheater, go to and play. We'll go ahead and select that. And it also formats it with the right format with the uppercase settings. And we'll double click on that. And we're going to go ahead and open and close the parentheses, followed by a semicolon. Okay, so in here, we need to tell it where we want it to go. And where we want it to go is to frame 31. This is where the animation is going to start, right in here. So we're going to say when you click on here, we want you to jump to frame 31 and start playing. And that's the setup that we're going to have. Okay, so we'll go back to the code snippet. Or the action, I should say. And over here, we're going to say go to frame 31. And that's it. and our code is done. So do a command return, and now when I click over here, it goes to the other side. I'll go ahead and do a reload. Is we have two different options. This makes it go to the left, and then when I do a reset, this makes it go to the right. Now where this is going to go is in this idea that we're going to have a banner with two different choices. So this one will take us to one web page, and this will take us to another web page. And we're going to get an animation in here that's going to be this kind of visual reference to which way it's moving. That's really the trick here. It's just a matter of getting the code to control the interface.